Praise the Lord, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with Dr. Lesia, the Preacha. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that adoption is needed. Adoption and fostering. We need adoptive and foster parents. And I've done both. I've given birth to two children out of my own body, and I have raised through foster and adoption other people's children. And it is a needed thing. So thank you to single people who, for whatever reason, choose not to get married and not to have children of their own, for whatever reason, whether it's a choice or not, you know, thank you for adopting and raising children. For married couples who um, do not have children, whether you choose to have children, not to have children, or cannot have children, but you decide to, adopt and raise people's children, other people's kids, because the two of you do not have children either by choice or because you can't. Thank you for helping the children in our country. Thank you. Okay. Now that I said that, um, please click like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on your way in. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's greatly appreciated. Now that I've said that, for other adults who, whether single, married, and you have children, you know you can have kids and all of that, there is no need for you to mix up like that. Don't be mixing up all these kids. There's no reason to be doing all this mixing up. You know, have your kids raise your children, period. That's it. How am I? I'm fine. Thank you so much for asking. I appreciate it. So I consider men, especially men that are married and they have children, or a man that is married and his wife has children already. Situations like that, where you have a man with children, the woman has children, or maybe he don't have no kids, but he married a woman with kids, or she don't have no kids and he got kids, but they married, and now that they together, now they want to have some kids of they own together, or they gonna adopt some, and all this mixing up of different nations. Really, each child represent, well, I'll say each child from each set of parents is a type of nation of its own. Really, each child is a nation, but let's just keep it neat for this conversation and say each child from each set of children from each set of parents is a nation of its own. So if he comes into the marriage with some kids, she come into the marriage with some kids already, that's two nations coming into the home. And then they lay down and create some more kids, creating a third nation in the home. And then some people are actually bold enough to even adopt kids on top of all of that. You say you like me. Thank you so much. I appreciate the compliment. So I believe, and this is just me. I'm not saying that, it's in the Bible or, I'm not saying it's the law of the land. This is just my opinion based on experience and just life in general, my perception. Once a man, a woman take on a spouse, you must consider how you entered into the union. Everything must be considered, pre-considered. That's where the words like prenuptials and stuff come in. You have to consider the marriage before you even get there. You have to almost like start like the construction of it before you get there. You know, it's like marriage is like a house. It's a house. It's like a new constructed home. Most of us break our necks to get married and then buy a house through mortgages and pay on it, for 15, 30, now maybe possibly 50 years. And we put a lot of work into that house. But way before you even purchase that physical, natural house with an address on Apple Street somewhere, way before you get there, you have a created concept in your mind of a marriage. You sit down eating popcorn in front of a movie, talking about, wow, if we were married, we could do this, we could do that. If we were married, we could. That is the pre construction work of the marriage. You're pre constructing the marriage in your mind, and then you're verbalizing it, you know? And then at that point, it needs to become an agreement. It needs to become what you're visualizing together needs to be documented. Even before you say, I do, even bore you go register your marriage certificate at the courthouse, you need to have your vision documented, recorded. The vision of your marriage needs to be recorded so that you can always remember why you're building in the first place, what you're working on, kind of like your marriage mission. Everything that we learn, quote unquote, in the world, like the business world at work, and, you know, um, you can apply it to your marriage mission, the vision, your invisible house. It's like your marriage is the invisible house, the inside of you. And then the outside, is the stuff that the material world the things that we use to support our inner self. Our children are our offspring. So they are a continuation of our inside self and the outside at the same time. The offspring is really the true oneness of ourself. of the union, of the marriage. And it's going to grow on its own. But again, husbands, you have to consider the children that are going into the marriage. And then you have to consider if there should even be additional children in the marriage. Those are decisions you make before you say, I do. Those are the decisions you make before you register paperwork at a courthouse. You can decide way before you get married if you're going to have children or not. You can decide, okay, we're not going to have children because we don't have any now. We're not going to have any. But if we do, these are the terms and conditions. This is how I want my child raised. This is how I want my child to look. This is what I want. So that's when you have those conversations and discussions before the actual commitment. If you can't write down, discuss, and write down what you want casually, then it should never get to, a courthouse. It should never go that far. If you can't even write it down together, agreeing verbally, looking into each other's eyes without other people being there, without paperwork, without a process. It starts with creating like a dream, a vision, something that only the two of you can make happen together. Write it down, agree on it. You didn't notarize at a bank. Notarize it. You don't have to have a, a full blown prenup with lawyers and stuff. It doesn't have to be that deep. It can be a promise, a promissory note, or multiple notes. I like to handwrite my notes. I like to handwrite to my lover, to my husband, what I want, what my dreams are, my goals, my hopes. I mean, like, I'm okay on my own, and obviously they're okay on their own. But when we get together, we're supposed to create something new. Otherwise, what is the point? But my last marriage, as far as being cuck, a cuckold husband, that last marriage, he entered our marriage claiming to be a virgin, had never been with a woman. And according to him, I was the first woman he even kissed on the lips. According to him, I could never know this, guys. And there was no benefit in me believing it or not. You know what I mean? There was no benefit in me. I was married before and came in with two kids. So whether all this was true or not, it just didn't have a benefit to me one way or the other. But at the end of the day, he entered our marriage a virgin, and I'm divorced with two kids off the rip. So we had a conversation before marriage that we would adopt when the time was right. We would adopt. We didn't put like a time frame on it, but when the time was right, we would adopt. So again, going in, you have to have an understanding. But I had already been somebody's wife. He wanted children of his own. Well, that wasn't going to happen with me. We had agreed to that before. And for the record, I had my tubes tied in my first marriage. I had my tubes tied. I believe in having all my natural children by the same person. Less confusion in the home is what I was taught and raised. Have all your children by the same man, there's less confusion in your home. And I believe that. And once I realized that my last child was going to be my last child, I made sure I only had two. I've only had two births my entire life, two births, and two pregnancies, two births, two pregnancies, two births. So, so the first child, was well within the marriage. I was never pregnant outside of marriage, personally, just me. My pregnancies occurred within marriage, both of them. So the first one, I believe Most High asked me to have her. And then the second one, I asked him, could I have another child? And he said yes. And so, anyway, after God said yes, and I knew that was going to be it for me, I got my tubes tied in my marriage. So my husband allowed it. And back then, you had to fight for to get that done. Even with a husband and having two kids, I still had to like go through this process with my doctor to get my tubes tied. So, but anyway. And so, um, I sound like a gay sounding dude. Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't think that's a bad thing. And so yeah, have two kids and I entered the marriage that way. And with my tubes tied too. So after we were married, he desired to have kids of his own. And I'm like, I don't know how that's gonna happen. And so we followed through on the adoption. Now, the timing of when to adopt, we had an issue with that. And, but, we, fought through that and we ended up adopting. It wasn't the right time for me, but it was what he needed. And so we did it. And so we ended up adopting two boys. I had two girls already. So we adopted two boys. And, but later on in the marriage, he realized that, he still had this void in him and ever regretted marrying me and whatever, whatever, whatever. So that to me created the whole process of me being divorced, remarried, him having all these issues with, you know, regretting marrying. Um, I was really a dud, I guess you could say. He was a virgin and I was, a woman who's divorced with two kids with my tubes tied. So we were like extreme opposites coming together. And then he regretted it all, And so we were married 25 years. And so we were at year maybe 16, 17 when he started having all these regrets and voicing it and, just being that unhappy. But yet I don't have a career. I don't, I'm dependent on him. He not only wanted to add more children at a time that wasn't good for me, but it came at the cost of me not being able to contribute financially to the family. And so now he's filled with all this regret, and I have no financial independence, and it was just a hot mess. So it got to the point where, again, he claimed to be a virgin and all this stuff, but it wasn't true, guys. It wasn't true. And so, and because it wasn't true, um, it just got to the point where the marriage opened up because you don't want me, you regretted ever marrying me. Um, you know, his attitude changed, his behavior changed, attitude changed, everything changed. So, but yet he didn't want to be a single father. You know, the adopted kids, my kids were grown at this point, but the adopted kids were still in the house. They were still there. They still had to get through middle school, high school, whatever. So he wanted me there to finish the job of raising the kids, cooking and cleaning and all that, even though I had a PhD and could be independent. But, so, you know, so I'm like, well, I'm not going to just be your Cinderella slave and get no love. You know what I mean? So let's open the marriage. Obviously, you've been doing whatever you want to do. Obviously. He's been doing whatever he wanted to do the whole time. And he claimed he didn't believe in divorce and blah, 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 blah. I just got played real bad. you know, I got played and I was stupid and, you know, whatever. I was wrong for ever divorcing the first time. I was wrong. So that's why the second time just never made sense from day one. Okay. So as I tell the story, I do recognize that it's all foolishness because it should have never happened in the first place. Okay. But at the end of the day, it happened. We endured it. And I'm telling the story. So here we are. Um, and so someone's asking questions about Trump and the Epstein case and all that. Those are good questions. I may have to do a video on that, but I will pull out my tarot cards. Okay. Questions like that, I pull out my tarot cards for that. Thank you for asking. And it says, where am I from? Michigan. Someone says I'm a guy. Okay. That's not the worst thing in the world to be, is it? A guy. So anyway, um, so in exchange for hanging around to continue raising kids, even though he don't want me anymore, um, we opened up the marriage. Opened up the marriage where I could see other people too. So that's where the cuckold husband thing can come in. And, that's why a lot of husbands allow their wives to quote unquote run around, or they will share their wife, or, whatever, have become swingers with their wife, um, watch their wife. Um, there was a time where we even had a man um, move in and live with us, so that's where it can get kind of cuckoldish, and that's where, it gets weird when you have, stepkids, adopted kids, foster kids, and, all these different type of children living in the midst of all this. He didn't have any natural children at all. He didn't have any natural children. I brought 2 children into the marriage, and then he and I adopted 2 kids together. And then we were, you know, always helping families and kids and people, and, just fostering and, just helpers. That's just, how we were. And so the question is, why is it so dark? Um, Sometimes I just like to have a black screen. I think I speak more freely. I'm not as concerned about, expressing myself, you know, if I have to worry about how I look, how the background look, you know, when it's a black screen, I can just, press the record button and let it rip, you know? So, I closed the chat so that I could continue to talk, make the video shorter as well. But yeah, so, with him regretting ever marrying me and, just regretting everything, you know, but yet still needed me to continue to raise the kids, cook and clean and spread my legs. I never stopped spreading my legs, you know. I'm old school. I was raised by Southern people, never bite the hand that feeds you. And he was feeding my mouth and he was paying all the bills. I was completely dependent on him. I was a stay-at-home wife and mom. And I was really good. I was a good one. I mean, I was. But he was not happy. And how I can prove the extent that I was a good wife and mom, I mean, again, I gave up my career and financial independence to make sure that, our sons had the best care. They were both special needs. They both had special needs. And I could not, he couldn't be, this big time engineer, and I couldn't be a big time college professor and adopt kids that had special needs. How is that fair? Something had to give somewhere. And so the sacrifice, fell on me. I'm the one that already had kids that came in. My daughters were older, like 5 years older. My youngest daughter is 5 years older, you know. So I had to start all over with him. Not only start all over, but give up financial independence too. And then halfway through the marriage, basically get pimped out. I was basically pimped out. I couldn't do much else. And he out here sleeping around doing whatever he doing, and I don't know about it, but I ain't stupid. You know what I mean? Just because I don't know about it or you're not being honest don't mean I'm dumb. So I'm like, well, if you don't want me and financially dependent on you for everything too, well then I need to open up the marriage so that, I can brush up my skills. I need to open up the marriage in every way possible, not just to spread my legs to other men. It wasn't even just about that. It was to explore other um, career options, travel, see the world. You know what I mean? Open up, open. I had been closed in motherhood for at this point, at least 21 years at this point. My oldest is a mother now. I'm a grandmother now. He's telling me he don't want me anymore when I'm a grandmother after I done already raised the kid, did the job he asked me to do. Now you don't want me. Now you regret everything. What? What? Okay. Wow. Well, then I need to open up. Who am I? You know? And so I started traveling. I met men that could, pay for international trips. And, I met guys that, um, you know, had money and guys that didn't. I met guys that didn't have money. you know, you know what I mean? He had money. He's an engineer. My husband had money. So the money wasn't the point, but he wasn't using the money on me. My husband wasn't using the money on me. He would use the money on the family, but not me as the woman that I am. So I would attach myself to men that could spotlight the other parts of me, the parts that were closed off. You know, I've always wanted to travel internationally, you know, as a woman, not just, you know, on family trips. Family trips are fun. They are. But when it's just me on a trip or me and my man on a trip, I'm a whole different person. My wardrobe is different. The places I eat at, it's just all different. And so, as a married woman for 32 years, that side of me was hidden. And so, I'm on the other side of marriage. After 32 years, I'm on the other side of it, crawling out of it because, you know, no matter how much time you put into marriage, as the wife, you're just going to be kicked to the curb, abandoned, and told you don't deserve anything because you didn't work enough. So anyway, after I'm done crawling myself out the mud, I'm hoping to be that sophisticated woman that, I was denied, that I traded, you know, wife and motherhood in for. You know, I see the other ladies, they're independent, they dress nice and smell nice. And, I gave all that up to be a wife and mother just to be kicked to the curb. Like the women said, what happened? They said it would happen. But, some women actually do give men a chance. And I did for 32 years and it didn't matter. It really didn't. So that's why I tell women and men today, because two men can be legally married. Two men can be legally married. And at some point, at least one of the men will submit. One of those men will submit. Oh yeah. If you have brothers growing up, then you have some idea as to how intense it can get. Who wants to be alpha? I didn't have brothers growing up, so I don't know. But I did have older uncles, you know. But I did raise boys. I did raise some boys. But yeah, so that's how I believe I end up in a cuckold type situation. You know, it comes from initially when husbands are running around. Usually husbands are running around first. And in my case, my first husband, he was cheating and running around and married one of the women he cheated on me with, you know. And so that rolled over into the second marriage. He ran around, cheated or whatever. But then I pumped the brakes on it. And instead of divorcing, um, I just allowed the Lord to lead and guide me out of the situation because he was already committing adultery. And I was already in an adulterous situation. You know what I mean? Because I was married for a second time when technically I probably shouldn't have been. You know what I'm saying? So it was an adulterous marriage from the rip. So adultery is how it started, and adultery is how it ended. And it ended with him secretly running off with somebody. Even though we had a open marriage for like 9 years where There was no reason to lie about anybody. There was no reason to cheat or do any of that. So it ended with him secretly running off with somebody. He entered claiming to be a virgin and ended it by secretly running off with someone. So I don't know what's true. I came in divorced and end up divorced. So, my story's the same. I came in with 2 kids, and because he left me when the adopted kids were 21 and 22, I left with 2 kids. But he the one that left and filed for divorce, so I let them boys go right on with him, and I got my 2 daughters the way it started, and I got my 8 grandchildren. So, you know, adultery is just adultery from the beginning to the end, and it was what it was, and there's nothing I can say or do to change it. The way it started is the way it ended, basically. Just wrong, you know? And it was just that's my cuckold marriage. It was a cuckold marriage, basically. He had no natural children, and the children were stepchildren and adopted kids. And he didn't offer a whole lot. I mean, he offered money. He offered, houses, money, cars, stuff like that. But everything was such a secret. Everything was just so, it's like we were some type of image family. It wasn't a real family. It was like an image. It's like we were the family he used to get to the white woman he always wanted, or a white woman, just a white woman, you know what I mean? In general. But I just always say the white woman of his dreams, you know what I mean? It just makes it sound more exciting. But yeah, and it is what it is. It happened, and I'm here to speak about it, you know. And so during the years of the open marriage, I learned a lot about myself, good and bad, good and bad, because I was living a good life for so long, just, following the rules, dotting my I's, crossing T's, looking both ways when crossing the street, filing my taxes on time, and, just one of those kind of people. A substitute teacher in my kid's school district, the Girl Scout leader on the school board, just living that righteous type of life, self-righteous life, the life that he needed. I lived the life that he needed. He was funding it. He was paying for it. That's the way it goes. And when he was done, he secretly ran off, and I'm figuring it out on my own now. And I'm okay with that. It's taking a long time, some years, because I'm old. I'm 56 now, guys. I'm 56. So it's taking some time to figure out life, but I'm enjoying it along the way. Enjoying my kids, my grandkids, um, you know, being on YouTube, sharing my story, rebuilding my life, my life. And I don't want to be nobody's hoe no more. Therefore, I will never get married again. Fastest way, you know? So, yeah, I'm retired. I put in 32 years of legal marriage. I can be retired. I'm 56. I'm old. You know, on here in the chat, people say I sound like a man anyway. look like a man, sound like a man, old, you know. I put my time in. I'm supposed to look old. I'm supposed to be tired. I'm supposed to be retired. You know what I mean? I'm working on it. I'm working on it. So, but yeah, watch out for these cuckold type husbands. And the Bible call them, you know, creepy men. They're just creeps. And they look out for women like me who are just what I think that's silly. Just silly women. Just laden with sin. I was in an adulterous state. That's sin. So I was an adulterous woman. And it was easy for a creep to come in and say anything, do anything, and leave when he was ready. That's on me. That's on me. So I'm not trying to say I'm all innocent and nothing like that. That was my disobedience that brought that type of curse onto me and my children. And I'm just sharing my story. I'm just sharing my story. But I do take responsibility. I do. And I want to hold other people that are responsible as well. So that's it, guys. Thanks for listening. Click like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will be back. Thank you all.